A man is standing on a scaffold with a rope around his neck, seconds from death, for a murder he didn't commit. He knows who the real killer is. He could speak one name and walk free, but that name belongs to a 13-year-old boy. So he chose the noose. And then, from the back of the crowd, shoved, laughed at, invisible her entire life, a woman no one ever noticed opened her mouth and said 6 words that stopped an execution. "I will pay his debt." Her voice cracked. Her hands were shaking. A stone hit her shoulder from the crowd. She didn't flinch. She had just bet her own life on a stranger. Because a letter hidden in her dead father's desk told her that if this man dies, a secret dies with him. A secret her father took to the grave. She didn't know the full truth yet. But by the end of this story, that truth will cost one man his life, save a child from the gallows, and prove that the quietest voice in the room can be the most dangerous weapon in the territory. This story will remind you that your voice matters, especially when it shakes. You don't need to be loud, polished, or powerful to change everything. You just need to refuse to stay silent when silence is the easier choice. At its heart, this is a story about 2 invisible people who chose to see each other when the whole world looked right through them. It's about the courage it takes to speak the truth when the truth can get you killed, and the even greater courage it takes to trust someone with the worst parts of who you are. It proves that real strength isn't about size or weapons or power. It's about showing up, broken, scared, imperfect, and refusing to disappear. If this story hit you somewhere deep, drop a comment and tell me, which moment gave you chills? Was it Clara stepping through that crowd? Evan carrying her down the mountain? Or that moment in the alley he said something he never meant to say? I want to know. Hit that like button if you believe the quietest voice can be the loudest force. Share this with someone who needs to hear that they are not invisible. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe and turn on the bell. I'll see you in the next one. The scaffold platform stood in the center of the town square, rough pine planks still bleeding sap in the noon heat. Evan Crow knelt with his wrists bound behind his back, the noose already fitted snug against his throat. His knees pressed into the wood. Splinters bit through his worn buckskin trousers, but he did not shift. He did not beg. He had made his peace with dying 6 weeks ago when they dragged him out of the mountains in chains. But peace was not the same as acceptance, and Evan Crow had not accepted a damn thing. He was furious. Not the thrashing kind of fury that makes a man stupid, the cold kind. The kind that sits low in your belly like a swallowed coal and waits. The kind his Shoshone mother had taught him to carry. She called it the fire you do not show. She said it was the only weapon that could not be taken from you. He scanned the crowd, not looking for rescue. He was looking for one specific face. A boy, thin, dark-haired, maybe 13 years old. He did not find him. That absence made his stomach drop. Someone had hidden the boy. Or worse. Judge Leland Marsh stood to the side of the scaffold in a black coat so clean it looked like it had never touched dust. Silver hair combed back from a high forehead, hands clasped behind his back. He carried himself like a man who had never once been told he was wrong and had no intention of starting now. Marsh unfolded a piece of paper and began reading the charges. His voice carried smooth and steady across the square, oiled leather over stone. Evan Crow, you stand accused of the murder of Samuel Hartwick, landowner and respected citizen of this territory. Due to the severity of witness testimony and the risk of escape, this tribunal has determined that a jury trial is neither practical nor necessary. The sentence is death by hanging to be carried out immediately. Evan's jaw tightened so hard his teeth ached. He knew every man in a clean hat standing in that crowd. He knew whose boots were not scuffed by honest work. He knew who smiled with their teeth but not their eyes. Samuel Hartwick had owned the grazing land south of town. Rich land, fat grass, good water. But Hartwick had wanted more. He wanted the water rights on Evan's 20-acre mountain claim. That land was not much to look at. Pine and rock and a cold creek that ran year-round. But it was the only thing Evan's mother had left him. She had shown him that valley when he was 7 years old, before the treaties broke and the borders closed, and the soldiers came and pushed her people off the land the government had promised was theirs forever. Hartwick sent men with guns to convince Evan to sell. Evan sent them back bleeding. A week later, Hartwick turned up dead at the bottom of a ravine. Skull cracked, pockets emptied, and every finger in town pointed straight at the half-breed mountain man who had refused to sell. Evan did not kill Samuel Hartwick. He knew who did. And that knowing was exactly why he had not run when he had the chance. The executioner stepped forward, a thick-shouldered man named Pritchard with hands like shovels and a face that showed nothing. He checked the noose, adjusted the knot, and reached for the lever. And that is when everything changed. On the other side of the crowd, trapped in the press of bodies, stood a woman most people in Dry Creek could not have named if you paid them. Clara Boone was 26 years old, wide-shouldered, thick-armed, tall enough to see over most of the heads around her. She was large in a way that made people uncomfortable. Not because there was anything wrong with her, but because the world had decided there was, and she had spent her whole life learning to believe them. She stood with her shoulders curled inward, trying to take up less space than her body demanded. People bumped into her without apology, elbowed past her without a glance. She had learned to stand like that years ago, the way you learn to flinch before anyone even raises their hand. She had not come to save anyone. She had come to watch, same as everybody else. But in the pocket of her flour-dusted apron was a letter she had found that morning in her dead father's desk. Hidden under a false bottom she had pried loose with a kitchen knife. Clayton Boone's handwriting, shaky, stained with something that could have been tears or whiskey. She had not read the whole letter. The first lines had been enough. I did something unforgivable to the Crow Boy. If you are reading this, I am dead, and he is probably next. God help us both. Clara did not understand yet, but she understood enough. If Evan Crow died today, her father's secret died with him, and she would never know what Clayton Boone had done that was bad enough to confess on paper. Pritchard's hand closed on the lever. Clara pushed forward. A man's elbow caught her in the ribs. She stumbled, caught herself, pushed again. Someone laughed. Where's the fat girl going? Another shove, harder this time. She went down, knees hitting dirt, palms scraping gravel. She tasted dust. She got up, kept moving. She reached the edge of the scaffold. Her hands were shaking. Her throat felt like it was full of sand. But the words came out anyway, forced past 26 years of whispering. I will pay his debt. Her voice cracked on the last word. It was not brave. It was not commanding. It was the sound of a woman speaking above a whisper for the first time in her life and nearly choking on it. Nobody heard her. The crowd swallowed her voice like the ground swallows rain. She said it again, louder. Something in her chest tore open and the words came out raw and ragged and real. I will pay his debt. Silence. Every face turned. A stone flew from somewhere in the crowd and struck her shoulder hard enough to bruise. She did not flinch, not because she was tough, because she did not see it coming. Judge Marsh looked down at her from the scaffold. His expression did not change, but his eyes sharpened the way a hawk's eyes sharpen when it spots movement in the grass. The statute does not apply, he said smoothly. This is a capital sentence. Bond substitution is reserved for lesser offenses. Clara's voice shook, but she did not stop. The Territorial Code Section 14, Paragraph 3 says any condemned person's sentence may be commuted to indenture if full restitution is made to the victim's family and a bond is posted by any willing party. It does not specify family members. It does not specify lesser offenses. I have read the law, Judge Marsh. I have the right. She stumbled over the legal words, got some of them wrong, had to backtrack and correct herself. But she did not stop. Marsh studied her. Then something shifted in his expression. Not surprise, calculation. Clayton Boone's daughter, he said. Yes, sir. Marsh smiled. It was the thinnest smile Clara had ever seen on a human face. More like a crack in dry earth than anything that belonged on a person. Very well, Miss Boone. The law is the law. But I will add a condition. If this man commits any crime, if he sets foot beyond the town limits without written permission, if he so much as looks at someone wrong, you, Miss Boone, will hang in his place. Do you understand those terms? Clara's hands were shaking so badly she could barely count the coins. $300 in gold and silver, everything her father had left her. She poured it into Marsh's outstretched palm, and the metal clinked against his rings. I understand. Marsh gestured to Pritchard. The executioner loosened the noose and hauled Evan to his feet. They replaced the rope with iron manacles, the chain clinking in the sudden quiet. Indenture, not freedom. Ownership, not mercy. As Evan was led past Clara, he did not thank her. He did not look grateful. He spoke low enough that only she could hear. And what he said turned her blood to ice water. You read your father's letter. That is why you are here. Clara froze. He knew. He knew about the letter. He knew what Clayton had done. And he had known the whole time. The crowd scattered, already spinning the story into something ugly. But Clara stood rooted to the dirt, the key to Evan Crow's chains cutting into her palm, and a single question burning through her like a lit fuse. If her father had done something unforgivable to this man, why had this man let her save him? The first night a killer slept under her roof, Clara Boone did not sleep at all, not because she feared what he might do, because she feared what her father already had. The Boone Mercantile sat on the corner of Main and Ash, a two-story building with paint so faded you could not tell what color it had been, and a sign hanging crooked from one chain. Her mother had died 11 years ago, and nobody had straightened the sign since. The ground floor sold dry goods and tools and fabric and ammunition. The upper floor held 3 small rooms and a kitchen that smelled like old wood and older loneliness. The store was dying. Clara had known it was sick for months, but she had not known how sick until her father passed 4 months ago and she started finding the things he had hidden. Debts she did not know about. Credit stretched thin as wire. Suppliers tightening their terms. She worked 14 hours a day, dawn to dark, and the numbers still bled red. Her body bore the cost. Her back ached from hauling flour sacks off the delivery wagon. Her hands were cracked from cold water and lye soap. Her knees swelled each night from standing on wooden floors all day. She did not think about her body in terms of beauty or shame. She used it the way a farmer uses a plow horse, hard and steady and without complaint. And like a plow horse, it was wearing down. She put Evan in the storeroom. Not a bedroom. A storeroom, no window, just a canvas sheet laid over straw and a tin cup and a blanket that smelled like dust. He did not complain. But the moment she turned her back, she heard him moving, checking the walls, testing the door, counting his exits. She understood. A man who had spent his life being hunted did not stop looking for the way out just because someone unlocked his chains. That evening, she brought food down, cornbread and beans on a tin plate. She set it on a crate beside him. Evan looked at the plate, then at her. I do not eat food from people I do not trust. Clara set the plate down harder than she meant to. The beans slopped over the edge. Then starve. I do not care. She turned to leave. His voice caught her at the door. Not grateful, not soft, flat as a blade laid on stone. What did your father's letter say? That is none of your business. Your father sold the map to my land. He took money from Hartwick to show them the trail into the valley my mother left me. He sold every water source, every game trail, every campsite I had. If you do not know that, you are a fool. If you do know it, then you are not here to save me. You are here to buy off your father's guilt with my life. The words hit Clara like stones. She could not answer. She could not argue, because she did not yet know if he was right. She left. An hour later, she came back. The plate was empty. Evan sat in darkness, his back against the wall, watching her with eyes that gave nothing away. She placed something on the crate beside him, a small iron key, the key to her father's locked drawer, the one she had never been able to open. "I have not opened it," she said quietly. "I am afraid of what is inside. But if you are telling the truth, you have the right to know before I do." She left him in the dark. The key sat on the crate between them like a dare. He did not pick it up, not that night, but he did not sleep either. And in the morning, when Clara came down to open the store, the key was exactly where she had left it, and Evan Crow was already working, stacking crates in the dark, as if stillness was something that might kill him. She watched him through the doorway for a moment. His movements were efficient and sure. He handled the crates like they weighed nothing. The chain scars on his wrists were still raw, but he did not favor them. She glanced out the front window and something caught her eye. A boy stood across the street, thin, dark-haired, maybe 12 or 13. He was staring at the store with wide, frightened eyes, not moving, just watching. Before Clara could open the door, a man's voice barked from down the street. "Billy, get home, now!" The boy flinched like he had been struck and ran. The man calling him was Tom Ferris, one of Judge Marsh's deputies. Clara noticed two things about Tom Ferris that morning. He wore a wedding ring on his left hand, and in a town this small, he never once mentioned having a wife or a child. She filed it away, did not pursue it. Yet, on the third morning, the first person who tried to kill Evan Crow was not one of the judge's men. It was a 60-year-old woman with a kitchen knife and the dead man's last name. Mrs. Hargrove was Samuel Hartwick's aunt, a rail-thin woman with hard eyes and a voice that could strip bark. She came through the front door of the Boone Mercantile at 8:30 in the morning, screaming words that were not fit for print. And she had a butcher's knife in her right hand that was very much fit for killing. Evan was behind the counter, stacking bolts of fabric. He turned at the sound of the door, and the knife caught him across the palm before he could pull his hand back. The cut was deep. It opened the skin to white bone, and for a half-second there was nothing. Then the blood came, fast and dark and steady. Clara did not freeze. She moved on instinct, the way you move when something falls and you reach for it before your mind catches up. She grabbed Mrs. Hargrove from behind, both arms wrapping around the older woman's bony frame. It was not graceful. It was not heroic. Two women grappling between the shelves, knocking over a display of nails that scattered across the floor like metal rain, pulling down bolts of calico and muslin. Mrs. Hargrove was thin, but she was strong with fury, and she thrashed like a caught animal, the knife slashing the air between them. Clara did the only thing she could think to do. She used her weight. She pulled the older woman down and pinned her to the floor with her own body, pressing down with the mass she had spent her whole life being ashamed of. And for the first time, that mass saved someone. The knife clattered away. Mrs. Hargrove screamed and cursed, and eventually went limp, weeping into the floorboards. Clara held her until the fight went out of her. Then she let the woman up, guided her to the door, and closed it behind her without a word. When she turned back, Evan was gone from behind the counter. She found him in the storeroom, sitting on his cot. His right hand was a mess of blood and torn skin. In his left hand, he held a leather needle. In his teeth, he gripped a length of waxed thread. He was sewing his own wound shut. Clara stood in the doorway and watched. He did not flinch, did not groan. His jaw clenched so hard she could see the muscles jumping under his beard. Cold sweat ran down his forehead and dripped off his chin, but his hands were steady, rock steady. The needle went in, the thread pulled through, and the edges of the cut drew together one stitch at a time. "We should get the doctor," Clara said. "The doctor reports to Marsh. Marsh only needs one excuse." Clara understood. She sat down beside him on the cot and held the lamp closer so he could see what he was doing. She did not speak, did not touch him, just sat there in the blood smelling dark, holding light for a man who had no one else to hold it. That was the moment she stopped seeing him as a killer. She did not start seeing him as innocent either. She just started seeing him as a person, a man in pain who had been alone so long he did not even think to ask for help. The next day, Tom Ferris came into the store. He pretended to browse, picked up a tin of baking powder, set it back down, picked up a spool of wire, put it back. But Clara was watching his eyes, and his eyes were not on the merchandise. They were on the wall behind the counter. Her father's map hung there. Clayton Boone had drawn it himself over the course of 20 years. Every land transaction in the valley marked in careful ink. Every sale, every purchase, every transfer of deed. Tom's eyes traced specific lines on that map. Specific parcels. His lips moved slightly, counting. Clara picked up a coil of rope from the shelf beside her and held it out. "Good rope," she said. "Strong. Probably hold a man's weight if you needed it to." Tom's face went rigid. His hand tightened on the spool of wire. For a long moment they stared at each other across the counter. He left without buying anything. But before he stepped through the door, he looked back one more time, not at Clara, not at Evan, at the map. Later that afternoon, Clara was sweeping the front steps when she heard two women talking on the boardwalk across the street. "Have you seen the Ferris boy lately? Billy?" "No. Ruth keeps him home. Has not been to school in weeks. Poor thing. Locked up like a prisoner in his own house." Clara swept the same spot 3 times, listening. Then she went inside and did not mention it to anyone. That night, she could not sleep. She lay in her narrow bed upstairs, listening to the wind push against the window glass and the creak of the old building settling around her. Sometime after midnight, she heard something from below, a rhythmic scraping sound, slow and steady. She pulled her shawl around her shoulders and went down the stairs. The storeroom was dark except for the thin moonlight that crept under the back door. Evan sat on the floor against the far wall. In his lap, he held a hunting knife. Not a kitchen knife, a real knife, the kind made for skinning animals or cutting throats. He was running the blade back and forth across a whetstone with the patient rhythm of a man who had done this 1,000 times. His eyes were different. That was what scared her. They were distant and cold. Not the eyes of the man she had sat beside that afternoon. These were the eyes of something older and darker, something that lived in the mountains and solved problems with its hands. For 3 or 4 seconds he did not seem to know she was there. Then he looked up. His face was flat, empty. "Sometimes I think about how much simpler it would be to put this knife in Marsh's throat while he sleeps." Clara's pulse hammered. "You would not do that. You do not know what I would do." The silence that followed was not comfortable. It was not tense. It was the kind of silence that comes when you realize you're standing next to something dangerous, and you are not sure whether it is a campfire or a forest fire. She went back upstairs. She did not sleep. But she did something else. She took the key from the pocket of her dress, the key she had offered Evan, the one he had not touched. She crossed to her father's desk, knelt down, and opened the locked drawer herself. Inside was a second ledger. Not the store accounts she kept on the counter, the real accounts, the ones Clayton Boone had hidden from the world. She opened it under the light of a single candle and read. The entries were in her father's careful handwriting, dates and amounts and names. On a page near the middle, she found what she was looking for. November 3rd, 1873. Received $200 from Samuel Hartwick in exchange for detailed survey information regarding the Crow land claim. Access trails, water sources, game paths, campsite locations. Full survey completed and delivered. Clara's hands went numb. She turned to the last page of the ledger and found writing that was not careful at all. It was shaky, blotted, the letters leaning sideways like they were trying to fall off the page. "God forgive me. I sold an innocent boy's birthright to keep this store alive. I did it for Clara. That does not make it right." Clara closed the ledger, pressed it against her chest, and cried. Not because her father was a bad man, because she understood why he had done it. The store was failing. The money was running out. She was the reason he needed it. Her father had sold Evan Crow's inheritance to feed his daughter. The weight of that sat on her chest like a stone, and she cried until her throat was raw and her face was swollen, and there were no tears left. In the morning, she went downstairs. Evan was already awake, straightening shelves. She set the ledger on the workbench in front of him and stood back with her arms crossed. Evan looked at it, then at her face, swollen from crying, jaw set hard. "My father sold you," she said. "Now I'm trying to buy you back. But I do not know if I can afford it." Evan opened the ledger, read the first page, the second. His hand, the one Mrs. Hargrove had cut, trembled once, then went still. "You do not owe me for your father's sins. Then who does?" He did not answer, because the answer was the whole damn town. Evan Crow knew two things about the death of Samuel Hartwick that no one else alive knew. The first was that Hartwick did not die where they found him. The second was that the person who killed him had every right to do it. And that second truth was the one that had made Evan accept the rope instead of running. The ledger changed things between them, not because it proved Clara was good, because it proved she chose truth over comfort. She could have burned that ledger. She could have pretended she never found it. Instead, she laid it out in front of the one man it would hurt most and let him read every word. That took something. Evan did not have a word for what it took, but he recognized the shape of it. It looked like the way his mother used to face into the wind when the storms came, not turning away even when the dust bit her skin, standing there, open, unprotected, choosing to feel whatever came. He started answering Clara's questions. Not all of them, not the dangerous ones, but enough. Hartwick did not die in that ravine, he told her. They were in the storeroom. Evening light coming in under the back door. Evan drew on the floor with a piece of charcoal, sketching the land south of town. Hartwick's cabin here, the ravine where they found the body here. 3 miles between them. He died in his cabin, Evan said. Then someone moved the body to the ravine and cracked his skull after he was already dead. Made it look like a robbery. Made it look like me. Clara stared at the charcoal map. "How do you know?" "Because I was there, that night. I came to the cabin and found him dead." Clara went still. "If you found the body, why did you not tell anyone?" "Because the person who killed Hartwick was standing right there when I walked in. And telling anyone would have destroyed them. Who was it?" "No." The word dropped between them like a stone into a well. "I showed you everything," Clara said. Her voice was rising. She did not try to stop it. "I showed you the worst thing my father ever did. I gave you the ledger. I put my life on the line for you, and you will not trust me with this. There are truths that protect innocent people by staying in the dark, and there are truths that kill innocent people by staying in the dark. Which one is this?" Evan did not answer. That night he sat alone in the storeroom and reached into the bottom of his pack. Beneath the spare shirt and the fire steel and the strip of dried elk meat he kept for emergencies, his fingers found the thing he had carried for 6 months, a single bullet, small caliber, slightly deformed where it had struck the cabin wall. He had dug it out of the wood that night while the killer stood shaking beside him, and he had kept it ever since. Not to protect himself. If it came to that, one bullet would not save him. He kept it because this bullet told a story. The caliber said small pistol. The angle said close range, shot from below. Someone shorter than the victim. The deformation said the shooter's hand was shaking when they pulled the trigger. Everything about this bullet said desperate. Everything about it said afraid. If the killer was ever found, Evan needed this bullet to prove it was not murder. It was survival. He put the bullet back and closed his pack. Upstairs, Clara channeled her anger the only way she knew how. She worked. She studied her father's map on the wall, the one Tom Ferris had been staring at, and she cross-referenced it with the ledger. The pattern was there, if you knew how to look. In the past 2 years, 7 parcels of land surrounding Evan's claim had changed hands. Everyone purchased through intermediaries, shell companies, false names. But the money always traced back to the same source. Judge Leland Marsh. The 7 parcels formed a ring around Evan's 20 acres, and Evan's 20 acres sat right on top of the headwaters of Stillwater Creek, the only year-round water source for 50 miles in any direction. The ranches downstream depended on that water. The mines depended on it. The town depended on it. The motive was not land. It was water. Whoever controlled Stillwater Creek controlled everything south of Dry Creek. And Evan's claim was the last piece of the puzzle. She brought her findings to Evan the next morning, spread the map out on the workbench, showed him the pattern. Evan studied it. His eyes went dark. Not with surprise, but with confirmation. Like hearing a truth you already knew but hoped was not real. Marsh did not just want Hartwick dead, he said. He wanted me dead, and my land empty. 2 problems solved with 1 noose. A beat of silence, then quieter. I should have killed him when I had the chance. Clara's stomach dropped. You still could. That is what scares me. He looked at her, and for one terrible moment, she saw something in his eyes that was not anger. It was calculation. The cold arithmetic of a man weighing whether a knife in the dark would be more efficient than justice in the light. Then it passed. He exhaled, and the tension left his shoulders like smoke leaving a chimney. Your way, he said. We try your way. Clara let out a breath she had not known she was holding. We need to go to that cabin, she said. See the real scene. Bring back proof the body was moved. That is Marsh's territory. If we are caught outside the town line, the deal is broken. They hang me and they hang you. Then we do not get caught. Evan looked at the map, then at her. This woman who had every reason to walk away and kept choosing not to. Bring a gun, he said. I do not know how to shoot. Then bring one anyway. Sometimes just the sound is enough. They left town at 3 in the morning, and before the sun cleared the ridgeline, Clara Boone understood why men feared the open country. Not because of the emptiness, because in all that emptiness there was nothing left to hide behind. The night was cold and clear, stars thick as spilled salt across the sky. Clara wore her father's old wool coat, heavy and too big. The sleeves rolled back twice so her hands could grip the lantern. Evan moved ahead of her on the trail, his steps light and certain, even in the dark. He knew this land the way she knew the layout of her store shelves. By feel, by memory, by the smell of pine and the sound of water. Clara did not know this land at all. She had never been more than 2 miles from Dry Creek in her life. The terrain climbed steeply from the valley floor, switchbacks carved into loose shale and scree that shifted under her boots. She stumbled, caught herself on a rock, stumbled again. Her knees screamed on the inclines, her lungs burned in the thin, cold air. She was slow and she knew it, and the shame of it burned worse than the cold. Evan moved fast. He pushed ahead, doubled back to check on her, pushed ahead again. His frustration showed in the set of his jaw, and the way his breath came sharp through his nose. If you cannot keep up, he said, I leave you behind. Clara was bent double, hands on her knees, breathing hard. The words stung, but she was too tired for pride. Then leave, she said between gasps. But being alone out here is still better than being alone in that store. Evan stopped, turned, looked at her in the pale starlight. She could see the moment he understood something he had not understood before. This woman was not just stubborn. She was so profoundly lonely that she would rather die in the wilderness than go back to a life where no one saw her. He came back, extended his hand. Not gently. Rough and practical, the way you grab a rope when you are about to fall. He hauled her up the slope and did not let go until the ground leveled out. They climbed for 2 more hours. The temperature dropped as they gained altitude, and somewhere past the timberline, Evan started to shiver. He was lean, hard as rope, but lean men lose heat fast, and even years in the mountains had not made him immune to the cold. Clara watched him shake for 10 minutes before she did anything. Then she took off her father's coat and draped it over his shoulders. Evan looked at her. What are you doing? You are shivering. So will you. I will be fine. She was cold after that. She could not pretend otherwise. Her teeth chattered and her fingers went numb, and her arms prickled with gooseflesh under her thin cotton shirt. But she endured. Her body, the body she had spent 26 years resenting, held its warmth better than his. The mask she had always seen as a curse became a kind of armor against the mountain cold. For the first time in her life, the thing she was ashamed of kept someone else alive. They reached Hartwick's cabin just as the sky went gray in the east. It was a sad little structure. One room, log walls. The roof had partially collapsed and the door hung from a single leather hinge. Whatever possessions Hartwick had kept there had been stripped months ago. Just bare walls and a dirt floor, and the smell of wet wood and abandonment. Evan went straight to the northeast corner and knelt. He pointed to the floorboards. Here. Clara brought the lantern close. The wood was dark with age and weathering, but there in the grain she could see it. A stain, larger than her hand, soaked deep into the wood fibers the way blood does when it sits long enough. The body was found in a ravine 3 miles south, Evan said. His voice was flat, professional, like he was reading a report instead of narrating the worst night of his life. Explain to me how blood gets inside a cabin if a man dies in a ravine. Clara pulled a knife from her coat pocket and began scraping. Thin curls of stained wood peeled away, and she caught them in a piece of cloth. Physical evidence. Proof the official story was a lie. Evan mapped the blood pattern with charcoal on a scrap of paper. Position, spread, direction of spray. It told the story of someone who fell forward, close range, not ambushed from behind, shot from below by someone shorter than the victim. They worked in silence for 20 minutes. Then Clara heard hooves. Evan was on his feet before she could stand. He crossed to the window in 2 strides and looked out through the cracked glass. When he turned back, his face had gone hard. 3 riders, he said. Trail from town. Tom Ferris and 2 others. Clara's chest went tight. How did they know? Someone was watching. Evan moved to the door. Does not matter now. We need to go. They went out the back, circling behind the cabin through a stand of pines. But the riders had spread out, and when Evan and Clara broke from the tree line, they found the trail blocked. Tom Ferris sat his horse in the center of the path. 2 hired men flanked him, both armed, both with the flat, patient expressions of men who hurt people for wages. Tom's voice was almost friendly. You are outside the town line, Crow. You too, Miss Boone. Judge Marsh is going to be real pleased. Clara's hand went to the revolver tucked in her waistband. Her father's old pistol. She had loaded it that morning with shaking hands. But she had never fired a gun in her life, and her hands were shaking too badly now to aim at anything smaller than a barn. Evan stepped forward. He had no weapon, just his body and his voice, and the truth he had kept for 6 months. He spoke low, for Tom's ears only. But Clara was close enough to hear. I know why you are doing this, Tom. I know about Billy. Tom Ferris went white. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like something had been pulled out of him. His gun hand wavered. And in that moment, in the space between one heartbeat and the next, Evan Crow's mind went back to the worst night of his life. The cabin, 6 months ago. Dusk. He had been heading south from his trap line when he heard the shot. A single sharp crack that echoed off the canyon walls and scattered birds from the pines. He followed the sound to Hartwick's cabin. The door was open, the lantern was lit, and standing in the middle of the room over Samuel Hartwick's body was a boy. Billy Ferris, Tom's son, 13 years old, thin as a fence rail, shaking so hard the pistol in his hand rattled like a snake's tail. Hartwick lay face up on the floor, dead, shot through the chest at close range. The boy's eyes were wild and wet and old in a way that no child's eyes should ever be. Evan had seen the bruises on Ruth Ferris's arms. He had heard the whispers in town about what Hartwick did to her, about how Tom looked the other way because Hartwick paid him, about how the boy had started sleeping with a knife under his pillow. Billy looked at Evan and said one word, please. Evan could have walked away. He could have gone to the sheriff. He could have done any number of things that would have been simpler and safer and smarter. Instead, he cleaned the scene, wiped the gun, dug the bullet from the wall and put it in his pocket, carried Hartwick's body 3 miles south in the dark and dropped it into the ravine, cracked the skull with a rock to make it look like a fall, emptied the pockets to make it look like a robbery. He told Billy to go home, to never speak of it, to forget if he could. Then Evan went back to his cabin and waited for them to come for him. Because he knew they would. Tom Ferris had seen Evan near the cabin that night. Tom would tell Marsh. Marsh would see the opportunity. And the noose would follow as sure as winter follows fall. All Evan had to do was keep his mouth shut. Take the blame. Protect the boy. He had been willing to die for that. He still was. But not today. Tom, Evan said, his voice barely a whisper, I have kept this secret for 6 months. I accepted the rope to keep it. But if you drag us back to Marsh, I stop. Not because I want to hurt your boy, because Marsh will find out anyway, and when he does, he will use Billy to bury all of us. Tom's horse shifted under him. The two hired men exchanged glances, hands on their guns, waiting for orders. Then Evan did something that made Clara's blood run cold. He reached up and grabbed Tom Ferris by the throat, pulled him half off his horse, squeezed. Tom's eyes bulged. His face went red. The hired men raised their weapons. Clara screamed. 3 seconds. 4, 5. Evan released him, stepped back. His hand was shaking, not from weakness but from the effort of stopping. Tom gasped, clutching his throat. For a long moment, the only sound was his ragged breathing and the stamping of nervous horses. Then Tom Ferris said 2 words. Go. Fast. They ran. Down the slope, through the scree, boots sliding on loose rock. Clara's foot caught on a root and she went down hard. Her right knee hit a jagged stone and the skin split open to the bone. Pain shot up her leg like lightning and blood came fast, soaking through her trouser leg before she could even look at the wound. Evan did not hesitate. He scooped her up, lifted her onto his back, and ran. 200 yards downhill over rough terrain, carrying a woman who was not light. His legs burned. His lungs screamed. But he did not stop until they were in the cover of a dry creek bed, hidden by rock and brush. He set her down on a flat stone and dropped to his knees in front of her. His hands found the hem of his shirt and tore. 1 long strip. 2. He wrapped her knee tight and fast, the cloth turning red even as he tied it. Clara sat breathing hard, pain and adrenaline and something else she could not name flooding through her. She watched his hands on her leg, rough and careful at the same time. The person who killed Hartwick, she said between gasps. You are protecting them. Yes, a child. His hands stopped on the bandage. The silence stretched long enough to become an answer. Oh, God, Clara whispered. Now you understand. Now I understand. And now I am twice as scared. Clara Boone had lived 26 years without anyone hitting her. That week she was hit twice, once with a fist and once with a truth she could not hit back. They made it back to the store before dawn. Clara limping, Evan supporting her weight on his shoulder. She had the wood shavings wrapped in cloth and tucked inside her coat. Evidence. Proof that Samuel Hartwick died in his cabin, not in a ravine. Proof that the official story was built on a lie. But proof was only useful if people were willing to look at it, and the town of Dry Creek was losing its willingness to look at anything. Clara found the graffiti at sunrise. Someone had come in the night with a bucket of red paint and written 2 words across the front of the Boone Mercantile in letters a foot tall. She stood on the boardwalk in the gray light and read them. The paint was still wet, dripping down the clapboards like wounds. She went inside, found a scrub brush and a bucket of lye water, went back out and scrubbed. The lye bit into her cracked hands and the paint came off slow, smearing pink before it finally gave way to bare wood. She was on her knees on the boardwalk, arms burning, when she realized someone was watching her. Evan stood in the doorway. He looked at her hands, already bleeding through the rags she had wrapped them in that morning. He looked at the fading red stain on the wall. His jaw tightened. He did not ask what the words had said. He did not need to. That evening, after the store closed and the shutters were latched, Clara sat Evan down in the storeroom and told him she needed the rest of the truth, all of it. She knew it was a child. She needed the name. Evan studied her for a long time in the lamplight. The cut on his hand had mostly healed, but the scar was thick and raised, and it made his right hand look like it belonged to a different man than his left. Billy Ferris, he said. Tom's boy, 13 years old. And then he told her everything. What Hartwick had done to Ruth, what Tom had allowed, what Billy had found out and what Billy had done about it. The gunshot, the cabin, the boy standing over the body shaking like a leaf in a storm. When he finished, Clara sat in silence for a long time. The lamp flame flickered and their shadows moved on the walls like ghosts. That boy did what every man in this town should have done, she said. That boy is 13 and he killed a man. Right or wrong does not change that. What do you want me to do with this? Keep it quiet. Find another way to beat Marsh that does not put Billy in a noose. And if there is no other way. Evan's voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. Then I hang. That was always the deal. Clara looked at him across the lamplight. This man who had accepted death to protect a child he barely knew. This man who sharpened killing knives in the dark and talked about putting them in a judge's throat. This man who had carried her on his back down a mountain because she could not walk. She did not have a word for what she felt. She was not sure there was one. The next day, she made a mistake that would cost a man his life. She went to see Jacob Merrill. Jacob ran the printing press on the east side of town, a narrow building tucked between a saddle shop and a boarding house. Jacob was thin and nervous with ink-stained fingers and spectacles that were always sliding down his nose. He had been a reporter once, back east, before he came west for his health, and found that frontier air was better for the lungs but worse for the conscience. Clara told him about the cabin, about the blood on the floorboards, about the body being moved. She showed him the wood shavings. Physical evidence, she said. Proof the official story is a lie. Jacob's eyes went wide behind his spectacles. He started asking questions. Clara answered them. She was tired. She was frustrated. She was angry at Evan for keeping secrets and angry at herself for understanding why. And in her exhaustion and her anger, she said something she should not have said. Evan knows who really killed Hartwick. He is protecting them. It is someone no one would suspect. The moment the words left her mouth, she knew she had made a mistake. Jacob's whole body changed. He leaned forward, his eyes sharpened. The reporter in him, the part he had tried to bury under frontier dust, came alive. Who? He said. Clara caught herself. I cannot say. I should not have said that much. But the damage was done. She could see it in Jacob's face. He would dig. He would ask questions. He would poke at the edges of Marsh's world, because that was what reporters did. They pulled threads, and sometimes the whole thing unraveled on top of them. She left Jacob's shop with a feeling in her gut like she had swallowed a stone. She was halfway back to the store when they came out of the alley. 2 men, strangers, faces she did not recognize. They wore range clothes and trail dust, and their eyes were flat and professional. They did not try to kill her, they tried to take her documents. One of them grabbed for the bag she carried over her shoulder, the one with the ledger and the wood shavings. Clara twisted away and the bag strap held, but the man's momentum carried them both into the alley wall. Her head cracked against brick and stars exploded behind her eyes. The second man came up behind her and punched her in the face. She had never been punched before. It was not like she expected. It did not hurt at first. It was more like a door slamming inside her skull, a sudden percussive shock that made the world go white and her legs go soft. Then the pain came, a hot, bright burst that started in her cheekbone and radiated outward until her whole face felt like it was on fire. She went down. One of the men stepped on her hand, grinding her fingers into the dirt. She screamed. Then she bit his ankle. sank her teeth in through his boot leather and the sock underneath until she tasted blood. The man howled and stumbled back. Clara rolled sideways and screamed again, louder, the kind of scream that carries. Evan came out of the dark like something that lived there. He did not announce himself, did not shout. Just appeared, moving fast, and the violence he brought with him was short and brutal, and nothing like the fistfights Clara had seen outside the saloon. He drove his elbow into the first man's nose, and the cartilage broke with a sound like a green branch snapping. The man dropped. The second man spun, and Evan caught him by the collar and the belt, and slammed him into the brick wall hard enough to crack the mortar. But the second man was not done. He pulled a knife from somewhere inside his coat and drove it forward. The blade caught Evan in the ribs, left side. It was not deep, but it opened a red mouth in his shirt that spread fast and wet. Both men ran. Their boots pounded the dirt, and then they were gone, swallowed by the dark. Evan slid down the wall until he was sitting on the ground, his hand pressed against his side. Blood seeped through his fingers. Clara crawled to him. Her face was already swelling. Her hand throbbed where the man had stepped on it, and her knee from the mountain was still stitched shut with thread that pulled every time she moved. But she crawled. "You are hurt," she said. "You are hurt worse." His hand came up, touched her face. Quick and rough, his fingers traced her cheekbone, checking for the break. Not broken. But it will swell something terrible. His hand on her face, in the dark, his blood on her clothes. They sat there in that filthy alley behind the Boone Mercantile, both of them bleeding, both of them hurting, and something between them shifted. Not like a door opening, more like a wall cracking. The kind of crack you cannot patch because it goes all the way through. Back inside, the storeroom, the lamp turned low. Clara's hands were shaking as she threaded the needle, but not because of the blood. She had sewn him up before. She could handle blood. Her hands were shaking because his skin was warm under her fingers, and she could not remember the last time she had touched another human being. She stitched the wound with small, even strokes. He held still, watched her face while she watched his wound. "Thank you," she said, "for coming." "I did not come for you," Evan said. Then, after a silence so long it ached, "I came because if you die, I have got no reason left to be alive." Clara's hands stopped. She looked at him. He looked away, fast, like the words had escaped against his will and he wanted to chase them down and stuff them back in. She finished the stitching, cut the thread, sat back. "Evan." He met her eyes. "Do not ever say you have no reason to be alive. Not to me. Not ever." Something cracked in his expression. Not softness exactly, more like a wall developing a fracture it could not repair. "Go to sleep, Clara, you first." Neither of them slept. The day Clara Boone learned that hope could die as fast as a man, the sky was so blue it felt like cruelty. Everything had been going well. That was the part that made it worse. 5 days until the hearing. Evidence was solid. The blood-stained wood shavings from the cabin. The land transaction map showing Marsh's pattern of acquisition. Clayton's ledger proving the corruption went back years. They had Jacob as a witness. Jacob would testify that the official account of Hartwick's death was full of holes. Things felt almost normal that morning. Evan sat at the workbench cleaning the wood shavings while Clara sorted through papers. He told her about his mother. Small things. The way she scraped elk hide with a stone blade. The sound of her voice singing Shoshone songs he could not remember the words to anymore. The smell of pine smoke in her hair. Clara made breakfast for both of them. First time they ate at the same table. Not comfortable, not easy, but close to it. Closer than either of them had been to another person in longer than they could remember. She was washing the plates when the boy came running. He was maybe 10 years old. Barefoot, face white as chalk. He hammered on the store door with both fists until Clara opened it. "Miss Boone, Mr. Merrill, the print shop." It burned. "He is dead. He is dead, Miss Boone." Clara did not remember running. She remembered being at the store, and then she remembered being at the print shop, and the space between was just gone, swallowed by panic. The print shop was ash. The walls had collapsed inward, and the roof beams jutted up like black bones against the blue sky. Heat still rose from the wreckage in shimmering waves. The smell was the worst part. Not wood smoke. Something else. Something sweeter and more terrible. Jacob Merrill's body was inside, burned beyond recognition. But Clara was not looking at the body. She was looking at the front door, or what was left of it. 3 nails had been driven through the door frame into the jamb, from the outside. Jacob could not have opened that door. Jacob could not have gotten out. And hanging from what remained of the door handle was a short length of rope, the same kind she sold in her store. She knew what it meant. She knew who had done it. And she knew why. Back at the store. Door locked. Shutters drawn. Clara sat behind the counter, staring at the wall. She was not crying. She was past crying. She was in the place beyond tears where everything goes quiet and flat and far away. Evan stood on the other side of the counter. He had not spoken. He was waiting for her, giving her space. But his eyes never left her face. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet he had to lean forward to hear it. I killed him. Marsh killed him. Not you. I told Jacob that you knew who really killed Hartwick. I told him it was someone no one would suspect. He started asking questions because of what I said. Marsh found out because of me. Evan went still, very still, the way a man goes still when he is holding something heavy and trying not to drop it. For a long, terrible moment, she saw anger in his eyes. Real anger, directed at her, not the cold fury he carried for Marsh, not the dark, calculating things she had seen in his eyes in the storeroom. This was personal. This was betrayal. I warned you, he said. His voice was flat, worse than shouting. I told you some truths protect people by staying hidden. I know. Jacob is dead because you could not wait. I know. The silence between them was the worst kind. The kind that holds both truth and pain and offers no comfort for either. Outside the store, the town was pulling its head in like a turtle retreating into its shell. 4 businesses on Main Street shuttered their windows, curtains drawn in the middle of the day, doors locked. The one woman who had been walking toward the Boone Mercantile saw the smoke rising from Jacob's shop, turned around, and went home. Marsh had not just killed a man. He had killed the town's willingness to resist. Clara had lost more than an ally. She had lost her audience. That evening she said the words she had never thought she would say. Maybe I should sell the contract. You run, I run. We both disappear. Evan looked at her across the counter. Then he did something she did not expect. He went upstairs. She heard his footsteps on the floorboards above. When he came back down, he was carrying his pack. Clara's heart cracked. She thought he was leaving. He opened the pack, reached inside, and pulled out a single bullet. He set it on the counter between them. Small, brass casing tarnished, slightly deformed on one side. This is the bullet that killed Samuel Hartwick, he said. I dug it out of the cabin wall that night. I have carried it for 6 months to protect a boy I barely know. I have told no one, not even you. He pushed it toward her. You want to quit, then quit. But take this, because if Marsh wins, at least you will have something to bargain with. Clara picked up the bullet. It was cold in her palm, small, heavier than it looked, heavier than anything she had ever held. If I use this, she said slowly, a child gets dragged in. Yes, and if I do not, then I die, and Marsh wins, and everything you sacrificed is for nothing. Is there a third option? Evan's face changed. She had seen him angry. She had seen him cold. She had seen him dangerous. But she had never seen him afraid. Not until now. There is, he said, but you will not like it. Tell me. I disappear. Head north. Draw Marsh's men after me. Buy you time to get Billy Ferris out of town before the truth breaks. They will catch you. Maybe. They will kill you, also maybe. Clara stood up. No, I will not accept that. Evan did not argue. They went to bed in their separate rooms, and Clara lay awake for hours, turning the bullet over in her fingers, feeling its weight. She fell asleep sometime before dawn. When she woke, the storeroom was empty. The canvas was folded, the tin cup was clean, the pack was gone. Evan Crow was gone. The only thing he left behind was the key she had offered him on the first night, the one he had never picked up. He had taken it now and tied it to a leather cord and hung it from a nail in the storeroom wall. Clara took it down, pressed it against her chest, and began to plan. Clara pressed her hand against the canvas where Evan had slept, still warm. She did not cry. She did not sit down. She did not fold up like a letter and tuck herself away. She was furious, not heartbroken, not abandoned. Furious. Furious that he had left without her permission. Furious that he had decided for her. Furious that he had sacrificed himself like his life was worth less than hers. He thinks he's a hero, she muttered, fastening the key on his leather cord around her neck. He is just an idiot. She dressed, laced her boots, pulled her father's coat off the hook, and went to war. Her first stop was the Ferris house on the south end of Main Street. A small clapboard place with a sagging porch and curtains that were always drawn. She knocked on the door and waited. Ruth Ferris opened it. She was a small woman, thin in a way that spoke of meals skipped rather than vanity. Her eyes were red-rimmed and darting. She looked past Clara like she expected someone else to be standing behind her. I know about Billy, Clara said. She said it plain and flat, the way you lay a card face up on the table. I know what happened to Hartwick. I am not here to threaten you. I am here to help. Ruth's face crumpled. She sagged against the door frame, and the tears came silent and fast, the kind that have been held back so long they do not make any sound when they finally fall. Clara stepped inside, and Ruth told her everything. What Hartwick had done, what Tom had allowed, the bruises she hid under long sleeves even in summer, the nights Billy lay awake listening through thin walls, the day Billy found his father's pistol and decided no one else was going to stop it. When Ruth finished, Clara said 3 sentences. I am going to take Billy somewhere safe, somewhere Marsh cannot reach him, before the hearing. Ruth's eyes went wide. Tom will not allow it. Tom does not need to know until it is done. They waited until dark. Billy sat at the kitchen table with his hands flat on the wood, not speaking, not looking up. He was small for 13. His eyes were the oldest thing about him. They were the eyes of someone who had seen a thing that could not be unseen and was still trying to figure out how to carry the weight of it. Clara loaded them into the buckboard wagon behind the store, Ruth in the back with a blanket and a bag of clothes. Billy beside Clara on the driver's bench. She took up the reins and snapped them, and the old horse leaned into the traces, and they rolled out of Dry Creek on the south road, moving slow to keep the wheels quiet. 2 hours out, the road bent around a steep switchback above a drop that went down 100 feet to the creek bed below. The horse smelled something in the dark. A cougar, maybe. Or a bear. Whatever it was, the animal panicked. It reared and screamed, and the wagon lurched sideways toward the edge. Ruth screamed. Billy grabbed the seat rail. Clara hauled back on the reins with everything she had. The leather cut into her palms. The horse fought her, tossing its head, trying to bolt. The wagon teetered. One rear wheel left the ground. Clara pulled harder. Every muscle in her arms and shoulders and back strained against the terrified animal. A smaller woman could not have held it. The physics were simple. The horse outweighed her by 1,000 pounds, and the only thing keeping the wagon on the road was Clara Boone's stubborn refusal to let go. She held. The horse came down, the wheel found ground. The wagon steadied. They kept going. She delivered Billy and Ruth to a town called Elk Fork, 30 miles south, where Ruth's sister lived above a dry goods store not so different from Clara's own. She watched them walk inside, watched the door close, watched the lamplight come on behind the curtain. Billy turned in the doorway and looked back at her. He did not speak, just looked. And in his eyes, Clara saw something she recognized. Gratitude and guilt and the terrible weight of being saved by someone who had no obligation to save you. She nodded once. He went inside. The ride back was the loneliest 3 hours of Clara's life. The dark pressed in from every side and the horse moved at a walk, and there was nothing to do but sit and think and feel. She thought about Evan, about his hand on her face in the alley, about his voice in the dark saying words he had not meant to say. I came because if you die, I have got no reason left to be alive. She spoke aloud to the empty road, just one sentence, an incomplete one. If I die out here, he will never know. She stopped, did not finish, did not need to. The unfinished sentence said everything. She snapped the reins and the horse picked up its pace, and Clara Boone drove through the dark toward whatever was coming next. Dawn was breaking over the mountains when she rolled back into Dry Creek. Anne Pritchard was waiting on the steps of the Boone Mercantile, the executioner's wife, a plain-faced woman with steady eyes and a backbone made of something harder than bone. Her face was gray. "Clara," she said, "they caught Evan. North Canyon. He has been shot." Clara's hands tightened on the reins until the leather creaked. "Is he alive?" "Yes, for now. But Marsh moved the hearing to tomorrow morning, and this time there are no papers that are going to save him." Clara climbed down from the wagon. Her legs were stiff. Her back ached. Her hands were raw from the reins. She was exhausted beyond anything she had ever known. She gripped the key around her neck. "I do not need papers," she said. "This time I am using the truth." "The truth got Jacob killed," Anne said softly. "I know. That is why this time I am not going to whisper it. I am going to make sure the whole territory hears." Evan Crow woke in a jail cell with a bullet in his shoulder and the taste of blood in his mouth. Through the bars he could see the scaffold in the town square being rebuilt. New rope coiled on the platform. Fresh pine planks still pale in the morning light. They were building it for him. Again. His left arm would not work. The bullet had gone in through the front of his shoulder and lodged against the bone, and every time he tried to move the arm, white-hot pain shot from his collarbone to his fingertips. He had torn a strip from his shirt and fashioned a rough sling, but it was not much use. The wound seeped through the fabric and left dark stains on the cot. He had drawn Marsh's men north for 2 days. That part had worked. 2 days for Clara to get Billy out. 2 days for the truth to settle into whatever shape it needed to take. But they had caught him at the North Fork of Stillwater Creek. 3 riders. He ran. They shot. Now he was here. In the same cell he had occupied 6 weeks ago. Same bars, same cot, same smell of rust and old sweat. The only difference was that this time no one was coming to save him. At least that is what he thought. He lay on the cot and stared at the stone ceiling and thought about the things he should have said to Clara Boone. He did not know what to call the feeling. He had never loved anyone. Not like that. Not the way people in towns talked about love with flowers and promises and rings. What he felt was simpler and harder. When Clara sat beside him in the dark and stitched his wound with shaking hands, it was the first time in 15 years he had felt safe. Not safe from danger. Safe in a deeper way. Safe enough to be still. Safe enough to stop running. He whispered it to the stone wall because the stone wall could not judge him and could not repeat it. I should have told her. On the other side of town, Clara Boone was not sleeping either. She sat at her father's desk with a candle burning low and assembled everything she had. The ledger, the wood shavings, the bullet, the land transaction map, notes she had written in her careful slanted hand about every lie and every inconsistency in the official story. It was not enough. She knew that. Papers and evidence might have worked if the judge was honest, but the judge was the criminal. Presenting evidence to Marsh was like asking the wolf to judge the sheep. She needed something else. She needed the machine to break from the inside. She put on her coat and went out into the dark. Pritchard's house was at the north end of town, a well-built place, kept up. The kind of house a man maintains when he needs the outside to look respectable because the inside is falling apart. Anne answered the door. Behind her in the front room, Clara could see Pritchard sitting in a chair by the fireplace. He was not reading, not whittling, just sitting, staring at the fire with the empty face of a man who has done terrible things and knows he will be asked to do them again. Clara stepped inside, walked past Anne, stood in front of Pritchard until he looked up. "You know the man they're going to hang tomorrow," she said. "You have put the rope around his neck before. You remember how it felt. You remember the weight of the lever. You remember his eyes." Pritchard's face twitched. Clara kept going. "You go home to your boy every night. You tuck him in. You tell him to be good and to do what is right. And then you go to the town square and you kill innocent men because a corrupt judge tells you to. How long before your boy is old enough to understand what you do? How long before he looks at you the way you look at yourself?" Pritchard's eyes filled. He did not wipe them. The tears ran down into his beard and he let them. "If you tie that rope again tomorrow," Clara said, "you will remember it for the rest of your life. And your boy will know. Children always know." Pritchard nodded, just once. A small, tight movement that cost him more than anyone watching could have guessed. Clara left him there, walked back through the dark streets, and found a coach she did not recognize parked in front of the Boone Mercantile. A woman stood beside it, older, tall, silver-haired, dressed in traveling clothes that were dusty but expensive. She carried herself like someone who had once been afraid of the world and had decided to stop. Clara approached carefully. "Can I help you?" The woman turned. Her eyes were sharp and tired and kind. "Are you Clara Boone?" "Yes. My name is Margaret Hartwick. I am Samuel Hartwick's widow. You wrote me a letter 2 weeks ago." Clara's breath caught. She had written that letter in Jacob's print shop, sent it through Jacob before he died. She had not known if it would arrive, had not known if the widow would care. "I received your letter in Helena," Margaret said, "and I have spent the last 3 days reading my dead husband's private papers." She reached into her traveling bag and pulled out a bundle of letters tied with string. "These are correspondence between my husband and Judge Marsh. Business dealings, land transactions, and a very detailed account of how they planned to steal Evan Crow's property." Clara took the bundle. Her hands were shaking. "But that is not all," Margaret said. She pulled a second document from her bag, a single sheet of heavy paper with an official seal. "Your letter reached the territorial governor's office. This is an order of investigation signed by the governor himself. Judge Marsh is to be removed from the bench pending a full inquiry into corruption of office and conspiracy to commit murder." Clara stared at the document. Her eyes blurred and she blinked hard to clear them. "Why?" she whispered. "Why did you come?" Margaret Hartwick looked at her with something that was not pity. It was recognition. One woman seeing another. "Because a girl in the middle of nowhere wrote me a letter that said the truth deserved to be known. And I wanted to meet the person who had the courage to write it." The hearing convened at 10 in the morning. The courtroom was a single room on the second floor of the territorial office building. Wooden benches packed tight. Windows closed against the cold. The air smelled of sweat and dust and fear. Marsh sat behind the bench in his black robe. Tom Ferris stood by the side door. 2 armed men flanked the room. Evan sat chained to a chair at the front. His left arm hung useless in its sling. His face was gray with pain and blood loss, but his eyes were open. And when Clara walked through the door, those eyes found her and held on like a drowning man finding solid ground. Clara took her place at the front of the room. She was not a lawyer. She had no training. She had a leather folder and shaking hands and the truth. She presented the evidence. The ledger first, showing Clayton Boone's payment from Hartwick, proving the land grab went back years. Then the wood shavings, explaining how blood in a cabin 3 miles from the ravine proved the body was moved. Then the map, showing Marsh's pattern of land acquisition, the noose of property closing around Evans' water rights. She stumbled over words, lost her place twice, had to backtrack and start a sentence over because her throat locked up. She was not polished, she was not smooth, she was real. Marsh countered each piece, circumstantial, unverified, obtained illegally. His voice was calm, controlled. The voice of a man who had been running this courtroom for 20 years and had never once lost. Then Pritchard stood up, the executioner, the man who had put the rope around Evans' neck, the man Marsh trusted more than anyone in Dry Creek. He stood from his seat on Marsh's side of the courtroom, and without a word he walked across the room and sat down on Clara's side. He did not speak. He did not need to. Everyone in that room understood what that crossing meant. The murmur that ran through the crowd was like a wave breaking on rock. Margaret Hartwick stood next. She presented the governor's investigation order, read it aloud in a voice that carried to every corner of the room. Marsh's composure cracked. Not much. A tightening around the eyes, a whitening of the knuckles where his hands gripped the bench. But Clara saw it. The whole room saw it. Then Marsh did the thing Clara had been afraid of since the beginning. He reached under the bench. Yo. And when his hand came back up, it held a revolver. He pointed it at Clara. "If I go down," he said, and his voice was no longer smooth, no longer controlled. It was the voice of a man watching everything he built crumble around him. "If I go down, I am taking you with me." The room went silent. Not the quiet of anticipation. The silence of held breath and stopped hearts. And then Evan Crow, chained to a chair with a bullet in his shoulder and no weapon in reach, did the only thing he could do. He used the truth. "Marsh." His voice broke across the courtroom like a rifle shot. "I know who killed Hartwick, and it was not me. And it was not anyone she named. It was your people who killed him, and you have known from the start because you paid for it." A half-truth, calculated, precise. Tom Ferris was Marsh's deputy. Marsh had orchestrated the cover-up. The blame was not entirely false, but it was aimed to protect a 13-year-old boy while painting a target on Evan's own chest. Marsh swung the gun toward Evan, and in that moment Tom Ferris moved. Not out of courage, not out of conscience. Out of the cold, terrified math of a father who knew that if Marsh shot Evan, the full truth about Billy might come out. And Tom could not take that risk. He tackled Marsh from behind. The gun went off. The bullet punched through the ceiling and plaster rained down like dirty snow. Tom pinned Marsh to the floor, reached for his belt, and pulled out a pair of iron manacles, the same ones that had held Evan. The click of them closing around Marsh's wrists was the loudest sound Clara had ever heard. Evan slumped in his chair. The exertion had torn his shoulder wound open and blood was spreading dark and fast through his shirt. His eyes were going glassy. Clara was on her knees beside him before she knew she had moved, her hands on his chest, his blood on her fingers. "Do not you die," she said. "Do not you dare die. I did not give you permission." Evan's eyes found hers, half closed, fading, but in them was something that looked almost like a smile. "You do love giving orders, and you always listen, so keep listening." His eyes closed. She screamed for the doctor. And this time, for the first time, the whole town came running. Evan Crow survived for 2 reasons. The bullet had grazed the bone instead of shattering it. And Clara Boone refused to leave his bedside for 4 days straight, even when the doctor told her to go home, and she said, "I am home." She slept in a chair beside his cot in the storeroom, the same storeroom where she had first put him, the same canvas and straw and tin cup. But everything was different now. The air was different. The silence was different. It was no longer the silence of two strangers circling each other. It was the silence of two people who had bled on each other and survived. The legal matters resolved themselves with the mechanical efficiency of machinery that had been jammed for years finally coming unstuck. Marsh was transported under armed guard to the territorial prison at Deer Lodge, the oldest and harshest lockup in Montana Territory. The charges were murder for Jacob Merrill's death, conspiracy, corruption of office. The territorial court sentenced him to 20 years. He would die behind those stone walls, and everyone in Dry Creek knew it. Tom Ferris resigned his deputy's badge, laid it on the desk at the sheriff's office, and walked out without a word. He was not charged. Clara made sure of that. She kept her promise. The secret about Billy stayed buried. The official story became that Hartwick was killed by a hired gun working for Marsh, which was close enough to the truth to satisfy the law, and far enough from it to protect a boy who had already paid more than any child should have to pay. 2 new deputies were elected by town vote. The process took 3 contentious meetings and ended with a rancher named Dawson and a carpenter named O'Brien taking the badges. Neither of them was perfect, but neither of them belonged to anyone. Clara did not attend any of the meetings. She was busy. Billy Ferris came back to Dry Creek with his mother 3 weeks after the hearing. He was quiet. He would always be quiet. He had done a thing that would sit inside him for the rest of his life, a stone he could not put down and could not show to anyone. But he was alive, and he was free. One afternoon in late November, the bell above the store door chimed, and Clara looked up from the counter to see Billy standing in the doorway. He did not speak, just stood there with his hands in his pockets and his eyes on the floor. Clara reached into the jar on the counter and pulled out a peppermint stick, held it out the way she would for any child who walked into her store. Billy took it, looked at her for 1 second, nodded once, and left. That was all. That was enough. Evan healed slowly. The doctor, a man named Warren, who had been too afraid of Marsh to treat Evan before and was now too ashamed to refuse, did what he could. But the shoulder was badly damaged. The bullet had torn through muscle and grazed bone, and the swelling had lasted weeks. When the bandages finally came off, Evan could lift his left arm to about the height of his chest. Above that, the pain stopped him cold. The doctor said it might improve with time. He said it with the careful tone of a man who did not believe his own words. Evan adapted. He was a man who had spent his life adapting. He learned to compensate with his right arm, learned new ways to lift and carry and swing. But the loss was real, and it was permanent. He could not chop wood the way he used to, could not haul heavy crates, could not do half the things that had defined his life in the mountains. That was the price. Every fight cost something. This one cost Evan the full use of his left arm, and it cost Jacob Merrill his life, and it cost Clara the ability to walk past the empty lot on Main Street without feeling the weight of what she had done. The print shop lot grew weeds. Nobody rebuilt on it. It just sat there between the saddle shop and the boarding house, a gap in the street like a missing tooth. Clara walked past it every morning on her way to open the store. Some days she stopped. Most days she did not. But she never forgot. Jacob Merrill's ghost lived in that empty space, and she let it. The town did not unite. That was the other price. Some people believed Marsh had kept order, and that Clara had destroyed something that worked. Arguments broke out in the saloon, and at the livery stable, and in the general store itself. People chose sides, and some of those sides were ugly. Clara was respected by some, feared by others, resented by a few who thought she had overstepped. She was not beloved. She was not the hero of Dry Creek. She was visible. And sometimes that was enough. One evening in December, Evan was sitting at the small table in Clara's kitchen. It was the first time they had been still together since the hearing, really still, Not working, not planning, not running from anything. Just sitting with cups of coffee and the last of the evening light coming through the window. He was looking at the mountains, the way he always looked at the mountains, like they were home and prison and church all at the same time. "You asked me once," he said, "why I did not run before the arrest, before any of this. You said it was to protect Billy. That was part of it." He paused, his scarred hand wrapped around the coffee cup. His weak hand rested on the table, fingers curled slightly the way they always were now. "The other part." He stopped, looked out the window. When he spoke again, his voice was rough. The kind of rough that comes from swallowing something that does not want to go down. "My mother is buried on that land, Shoshone Way. No marker, no stone, just her. In the ground, in the place she showed me when I was a boy. If I ran, Marsh would have taken the land, mined it, dug it up. She would have been." He could not finish. His jaw worked. His scarred hand tightened on the cup until the knuckles went white. Clara watched him. This man who had carried a bullet for a stranger's son and a secret for a dead woman, and a rope scar around his throat for a crime he did not commit. This man who sharpened knives in the dark and talked about killing, and had the most gentle hands of anyone she had ever known. "You stayed to protect her grave," Clara said quietly. "I stayed because it is the last place on earth where someone loved me, and I could not let them take that." Clara reached across the table, took his damaged hand in both of hers, held it. "They did not take it, and they will not. Will." Everything Evan had done since the first chapter reframed itself in her mind like a map being turned right side up. His refusal to run, his willingness to die, his fury at Marsh that went deeper than land or water or justice. It was never about 20 acres of pine and rock. It was about a woman sleeping in the earth who had loved him when no one else did, and he would have hanged before he let anyone disturb her rest. Clara held his hand, and the evening light turned everything gold, and neither of them spoke for a long time. Days passed, then weeks. Winter settled over Dry Creek like a white blanket, and the world went quiet. Evan's shoulder improved slightly. He could lift his arm a few inches higher than before. The doctor called it encouraging. Evan called it not enough, but he kept working. He had never been a man who stopped moving. He stayed at the store, not because he had to. The indenture contract had been voided by the territorial court. Margaret Hartwick had personally authorized the return of his land claim. He was free to leave whenever he wanted. He did not leave. One afternoon, Clara was changing the bandage on his shoulder. Her fingers moved carefully around the scar, peeling away the old cloth and laying fresh linen in its place. She could feel the heat of his skin and the hard ridge of damaged tissue beneath it. "You know what I like about you," Evan said. Clara braced herself. She expected him to say something about courage or stubbornness, or the way she had stood up in that courtroom. "You never apologize for taking up space." She almost laughed. "I apologize all the time. In your head, maybe. But out loud, you walk into a room like you own it. You stood in that courtroom like it belonged to you. That is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." Clara's breath caught, her hands stilled on the bandage. She looked down at him sitting on the cot, looking up at her with an expression she had never seen on anyone's face before. Not desire exactly, closer to reverence. She leaned down. She did not kiss him. She pressed her forehead against his forehead, closed her eyes, and breathed. "Stay," she whispered. "Are you giving an order or asking? Both. Then both answers are yes." They stayed like that for a long time, forehead to forehead, breathing together, the lamplight throwing their shadows on the wall. Two people who had started as strangers and prisoners and grudging allies and had become something that neither of them had a word for. Something that did not need a word. Something that was simply true. Spring came slow to Montana territory that year. The snow melted in patches and the brown earth showed through. And one morning the air smelled like mud and new grass instead of ice and wood smoke. Clara opened the store windows for the first time in months, and the fresh air swept through the building like a long exhale. Above the front door, Evan stood on a ladder. His left arm moved slow and careful, compensating. In his right hand, he held a paintbrush. He was painting a new sign. Boone and Crow Mercantile. Clara stood on the boardwalk below, hands on her hips, squinting up at his work. "The crow is crooked," she said. "My name. I will make it crooked if I want." She laughed. It was full and loud and unrestrained, the kind of laugh that fills a street and makes people look up from what they are doing. Not a polite laugh, not a quiet laugh. The laugh of a woman who has stopped apologizing for the sound she makes in the world. Evan looked down at her from the ladder. And for the first time in the story, for the first time in years, for maybe the first time in his entire life, he laughed too. The store was still in debt. His shoulders still ached when the weather turned. The town still whispered. Jacob's empty lot still grew weeds. But the sign was up, and two people who had been invisible were standing in the sun. Later that morning, a customer came in, a rancher's wife. She bought flour and nails and a spool of thread. Clara wrapped her purchases in brown paper and tied the string and handed them across the counter with a smile. The woman left. The bell chimed. Clara turned to straighten a shelf behind the counter, and her eyes fell on the corner of the store near the window, the spot where Jacob used to lean against the wall and read his newspaper. Empty now. Would always be empty. Clara went still. 3 seconds. The light moved across the floor. Dust motes drifted. Somewhere outside, a horse stamped and a child laughed. 3 seconds of silence for a man who deserved more but would have understood. Then she went back to work. That afternoon, Evan came in from the street. Pine sap on his hands, sun on his face. Sawdust in his hair from fixing the back fence. "Customer out front wants to buy rope," he said. Clara looked at him. He looked at her. The word hung between them. Rope. In this place. Between these two people. "Sell it to them," Clara said. "Rope is not guilty of anything." Evan nodded, took the coil down from the shelf, walked to the front of the store. The bell above the door chimed. Sunlight flooded the floor. And that is how it ended. Not with a speech, not with a declaration, not with a grand moment that tied everything up in a neat bow. It ended the way all true things end, with ordinary people doing ordinary things in a place they had fought to keep, with a crooked sign and a scarred shoulder and a key on a leather cord, with a woman who had learned to stop whispering and a man who had learned to stop running, with a store that sold rope and flour and nails and second chances. The rope had been meant to end a life. Instead, it started one. 2 lives, really. 2 people who the world had decided did not matter, standing in the sunlight, proving the world wrong, not once, not dramatically, but every single day, in the quiet, ordinary, stubborn way that matters most. Now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me what part of this story hit you the hardest. Was it Clara stepping through that crowd? Was it Evan carrying her down the mountain? Was it that moment in the alley when he said something he did not mean to say? Tell me. And if this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Because everybody deserves to know that their voice matters, even when it shakes, especially when it shakes.